Hey guys, welcome to Brian's Man Cave. So I'm trying something different. Normally when I do my live streams, I either just playing a game or I have a topic or something and I play a game. So this time I'm just like, let's just have a topic. So I had to think about something, and this is something that's been on my mind for a bit. I think it's been in the I don't know. It's been all over the place. It's been on Twitter. It's been, and it's not just the issues. Sorry, I'm just closing up the million windows I got open here. Um, with like Soldier Boy and all that stuff. But there's just a lot of talk of ROMs and whether they're good and bad and all that stuff. So I thought let's just open up a discussion and just talk about it because I've been using ROMs for a while, and I think a lot of people do use them. And it's not just stealing ROMs, but also emulation devices, which are huge. So they're starting to grow. So I'm gonna just open up the chat here and see who's in the chat. So we got Zen Zero. How's it going? Rex Warden. See if we can get some more people in there. So Rex Warden is saying that emulation is good, and I say that owning nearly every console release. I say this owning nearly every console released in the U.S. Yeah, now that's the thing too. Like some people will say emulation is only okay if you own the ROMs that you're using. The whole legality of it. I haven't actually spent any time looking into the legal aspects of it. I've seen multiple um, posts on it and stuff like that, but it gets really murky as to is it all about uploading or downloading, or can you legally have these ROMs, let alone play them or whatever, and is it okay if you own the cartridge or the whatever it is, the disc that has that game, is it okay? um, so there's that a little aspect of it as well. I'm just trying to get my chat window open. There we go. Rex is saying it keeps people with limited means of forcing themselves into the poorhouse, paying insane reseller prices for video games. Yeah, Stu's reviews. Of course it's good. Rex is also saying, I don't care about the legality. Typically, it's illegal. Yes, like we are saying that people are stealing ROMs essentially off the cartridge or off whatever, uploading it to the internet, and then people can just go and download them. But that's one form of using emulation. There's also recently, I guess the last emulation thing to pop out into the public was the PlayStation Classic, which is an emulation device, essentially. It's not running discs or anything like that. And I mean, it didn't do too well, at least from my perspective and from what I've seen from a lot of other YouTubers and just people talking about it, and even on Twitter, screenshots of the consoles in the store and the little bit of price tags that are 50% off, 20% off. So it's not doing too well. And what people were complaining about that is that it's obviously a ROM box, and they put on like the PAL ROMs on some of the games, which is the other kind of video type. We have NTSC here in North America, but overseas I know they use like a PAL format, and so some of the games from that format were put onto this device, and that seemed to be the downfall of that system, was the ROMs that they've put on it. Whether it's a good thing that PlayStation jumped into this ROM box market is there was also the whole issue with Soldier Boy, obviously, which created a lot of buzz amongst the retro community, and a lot of YouTubers were talking about that as well, and that's going more on the illegal side. So you got app games putting them out legally, like they're acquiring the licensing and they're actually developing these things to sell legally, and then once you get that device, you can play those ROMs, and nobody's going to give you a problem. Let's see what Stu's reviews got to say. I do care about the legality. Stealing ROMs and emulation are two different things. Yes, that's true. Emulation good, stealing ROMs questionable. Now, the stealing of ROMs, I guess, is also, we have to define what that even means. Like, is downloading a ROM stealing? Is it the person who uploaded the ROM? Are they the one stealing? And it kind of gets into that same thing with movies and, you know, copyrighted music and all that stuff. When someone uploaded a song to Napster or whatever it was back in the day, and people were downloading the songs for free, and who was the one breaking the law? Were both breaking the law? Was the uploader breaking the law? Was it legal to download but not legal to upload? And then, of course, it's like I said, if you own the game, is it legal? So if I download a copy of Super Mario Brothers, is that illegal and I can't use it, even though I own Super Mario Brothers on the Nintendo? Of course, then the other question is, if I bought the NES Classic, do I own all those ROMs now? So, well, not own them, but do I have the rights to use those ROMs? If you dump your own games, you're in the clear. Normally just exercise discretion. Yeah. Well, that's the question there. Stu's reviews. PS Classic is on sale now for $60. The problem is, even at $60, it's not worth it. None of the really good PS exclusive games are on there. Yeah, that's the argument I've been hearing, as opposed to the NES and the SNES Classic machines. Now, bear in mind, though, people are hacking those machines and then dumping all the ROMs on them. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter when it comes down to it, right? And I've seen multiple videos where people just plug in a USB or whatever. They do something. They plug it into their computer, they hack it, and then they dump every single ROM they can find on it. Whether it's good or not is another thing, whether it can actually handle those ROMs and play them properly. Rex Warden saying, let me go buy a copy of Kool-Aid Man for Atari or Captain Skyhawk for NES. Heck, I'll even try to buy Alien vs. Predator, the arcade game from Capcom. Oh, they're not selling those games? Yeah, that's part of the question. Because we say, yes, emulation, it could be bad, you're stealing ROMs, but is there a good, easy legal way to actually obtain these ROMs? And that was part of the discussion as well when, like, for instance, when Nintendo shut down their Wii store, you know, I remember I downloaded from that Wii store a couple of NES ROMs onto my Wii, so I could play them. And I always thought, you know, if I want more, I'll just go back and get them. But now they're gone, so I can't even do that. So where can I, you know, legally obtain these games without having to go out and buy the actual physical cartridge? And by that, you'd have to buy it through aftermarket prices. You can't just go to the store and buy a brand new copy of most of these NES games. Zen Zero is saying, I don't consider it as stealing when the only other option to get the game is paying unreasonable prices on eBay. Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. So it's kind of a divide there. Stu's reviews saying, I agree with you, however, there's nothing forcing you to play those games. It's not like play them or die. No, nobody's putting any knives to our throats and saying you have to play these games. I mean, this is purely choice. This is the part of the whole retro community. I mean, we often see these systems that we're playing, they're, you know, 20 to 40 years old, and they're slowly dying. They're falling apart. The games are becoming a little more obscure, and some of them, they're really expensive. Like, if you want to play certain games, you have to, you know, source them out on eBay, and it's a lot. It's good for Atari 2600 games, considering hardware for that system is dying rather quickly. Yes, that was my point. I mean, in most cases, like when I do my streaming, often playing video games, and I use emulation for that because I don't like I've said before, I don't have a capture card, and my setup is, you know, kind of obscure right now because I got this computer upstairs that I do all my streaming on, and I got my systems and everything and my TV all downstairs. So I'd have to like rework it. I have to get a capture card. So it was just easier for me to emulate. And most of the time, I'd say I'm emulating games I already own. Uh, I do have a huge, you know, Atari collection, and oftentimes I am. Now, there might be the odd game I might try out or play because I see it in a list. Um, but even just homebrews, a lot of homebrews. And a lot of these, they're offered on the Atari Age website. So they offer them as a download. It's not like it's, you know, I'm cracking into some website to steal them, or I'm going on some, you know, shady website that's like, hey, you can download these, don't tell anyone. So it is kind of, you know, weird that you kind of think, is it good? Is it bad? Am I allowed to? Is it only for my own personal use? And obviously, I'm not selling them. And this was the whole um, thing going on with Soldier Boy. And I've been watching those videos. A bunch of YouTubers have done, you know, videos on them, like Smash JT has done a couple of videos on it. Dreamcast guy. There's a lot of, you know, bigger YouTubers that have been talking about, you know, the whole Soldier Boy issue. And most of that issue is the fact that he was selling Chinese knockoff systems that were preloaded with ROMs. Um, Instead of just saying, I'll sell you the system, you figure out how to get the games on them, he was actually selling them preloaded on the system. And that's what raised a lot of, you know, feathers in the retro gaming community. Especially when people are like, um, saying like Nintendo, for instance, having very, very strong ties to their IP. In fact, um, whenever you talk about Nintendo on your channel, or you play a Nintendo game or something, your chances are you're going to get somewhat of a copyright strike. So they're very, you know, stern on not making sure people, you know, steal their stuff. The Atari Creep is saying, emulation is awesome unless you try to emulate a Jennifer Tilly sex pod. That sucks. What the heck is that? So I heard anyways. Hey, there's Smash JT. Yes. No one cared about ROMs legally until the major publishers realized they could monetize them. Now all of a sudden it's a question of is it legal or not. Yes, that's the big thing. I mean, it just all of a sudden seemed to be an issue. I heard my name. My ears were ringing. Had to come by. Well, glad you dropped in here, Smash, because I know you've been talking a lot about Soldier Boy and the whole issue that's been going on with him. In fact, I think I just saw some videos, topics saying that he's pulled out on it. So maybe the internet crushed him or something. Maybe Nintendo got word of it, or I don't know. Something happened. Zen Zero is saying that some of the more obscure consoles, microcomputers, would be lost to time if it wasn't for people that create an archive of ROMs for anyone that wants to play them. Now that's interesting because the one of my favorite systems is a Commodore 64, and I have still my discs, you know, from my collection. But I still go on. I think it's c64.com, or it's one of those websites where they do offer the ROMs free for download for anybody that wants to play them. And it's all about preserving the ROMs and preserving the games, because without it, you know, whoever has discs left, and let's be honest, most of these discs start to fade after time, and these games just disappear. Like I still have discs where I put them in today, and they used to work, and they don't work no more. So I've lost a few games off my system because the disc faded. Rex Warden is saying Nintendo's idea is to sell you the same ROMs every few years on different system and tie your license to that specific console. Huh. Retro rebooted. Nintendo has figured it out. That's what I mean. Like Nintendo knows what they're doing. What's up, Atari Creep? Except for the fact that all other systems get cracked and hacked before any others. Yeah. Well, the other thing too is every time we talk about these systems like the NES Classic, the PlayStation Classic, even the C64 Mini, everybody, there's always at least somebody, I mean, that'll show up and say like, oh, you know, you could just get a Raspberry Pi. It's like, yeah, and you know, what are they implying right there? You get a Raspberry Pi, which is like a mini computer. You can build a shell for it that looks like whatever. If you want to build it to look like a Nintendo or an Atari or something, and you're going to fill that sucker full of ROMs, arcade ROMs, Nintendo ROMs, Sega. You're going to fill it full of ROMs, and then you're going to have a ROM box, which is essentially what Soulja Boy was trying to sell. And those systems that Soulja Boy is trying to sell, or was trying to sell, you could already buy them on Amazon. So it's a big joke anyway. Greg is saying, nah, this ain't new. Remember Sony versus Bleem. Not sure what Bleem is. And like, for me, the first emulation consoles that popped out in my mind were the Sega ones. I remember when those first started coming out. And, well, I guess the Atari Flashback, too. The original Atari Flashback, I remember when that came out. I wasn't too crazy about it because it didn't have any of the games I really wanted. But then when AtGames took over, then it's like every year they're creating a new system. And, you know, for every system they put out, they didn't give you any ability to add more ROMs to it. It was like you got whatever it was, and that's it. Now they're putting an SD card in the thing. And the portable, the Atari Flashback portable, you can put an SD card in that, and you could add ROMs to that thing too. Smash JT is saying, yeah, Soulja Boy backed away from it. Looks like Nintendo or someone came down with this cease and desist on him. Well, you know, for the amount of attention he was getting, and he was being kind of cocky. I saw a bunch of posts where he put something out on Twitter calling all the YouTubers names and saying pretty much he could do whatever he wants. Like, I'm rich, I can do whatever I want. Proof that the U.S. legal system favors he who has the dough. Yes, it's all about the money. I mean, come on, let's be serious here. And you know, these emulation devices, I'm sure these companies are just like, wow, all we need to do is create some really cheap plastic device, put a little chip in there, download all our ROMs onto it, and sell it. It's all from nostalgia, right? I finally actually have been seeing the NES Classics and the SNES Classics in store. I remember for the longest time I could never find one. But when it came down to it and I'm staring at it in the store, I'm like, it looks cool, but I just don't want to spend that kind of money. I mean, I just, for what I'm going to get, I know what I'm going to get. So, you know, if they were much cheaper, I'd probably want to pick one up. I know the Atari Creep just picked up the SNES Classic. There's some pretty good games on there, though. Plus, I've been eyeing that Commodore 64 Mini. That looks pretty cool, too. Rex is saying that's how Nintendo was able to steal the patent for 3D without glasses used with the 3DS. Greg saying, for clarity, though, it is important to remember that there is a legal distinction between patents and copyright, and that issue has been a very big deal in the realm of mobile device technologies. It's interesting. Bleem was a PlayStation emulator for Dreamcast that also improved the visuals of specific games. Oh, okay. So that's what Bleem is. I didn't know. I was like, what's a Bleem? C64 Mini is also on sale for $60. Cool. Actually, yeah, I was just in a store the other day, and I saw the C64 Mini. Here in Canada, obviously, the prices are much different. Every place I seen it at, it was like $100. Now it's like 75, somewhere in there. And I know you can hack that one. I have seen And they actually released some kind of patch for it or something where you can add a lot more ROMs to it, or you can add up so many ROMs to it. The other system that they released, that was released recently as well, is the Retron 77. And I remember when that first got announced, I was kind of excited about it, and because it also takes actual cartridges. So even though it can take ROMs, it looks kind of like an Atari in a sense, where you put the cartridges in there, and then you can play your cartridges. Now, I don't know if it actually dumps the ROM onto the system and then just plays it as a ROM. I'm not too sure on the specs on that one. And I've heard some good and bad things about it. And when it was first released, I think it only allowed you to download or put up like a small amount of ROMs onto it. And then they created a patch that allows more or a lot. It's good for the Atari 2600 games. The reason is that the real hardware for the system is dying of old age. Yeah. Now, there is other companies that are trying to build physical systems that play cartridges, like the Collector Vision Phoenix. I've seen posts on that a few times, and it looks really neat. I mean, essentially that's all it is. It doesn't play ROMs, from what I understand. Is you need to have the actual ColecoVision cartridges to play it, and they're planning on selling it like just the system without controllers or anything like that. So you pretty much have to have your original Coleco controllers, or you have to get some kind of controllers that will be compatible. So they're not planning, from what I've read, they're not planning on making anything in the near future. There's just no release date for it. But that's cool that you can do that. There's also the other Retron systems for if you're into the Nintendo and stuff like that. Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis. You can get the Retron 5, which is, I think, also dumps the ROM from the cartridge and then plays it. Zen Zero says, I like that I can play C64 and ZX Spectrum on the PSP. I have a great appreciation for people who make emulators. Yeah, and see, that's the other part of emulators too. I mean, they come out with a lot of these, what are they, like compilation discs. I probably still have mine here, in here somewhere. Yeah, stuff like this. Ooh. That's the Atari 2600 Action Pack. This is for the PC. This is an old one. I bought this a long time ago. I don't know what the year this actually came out. 95. So it came out in 95. This allows me to play Activision Classic games. There's 15 of them. So they've been doing this for quite a while. I even have the same thing, but it's the Intellivision Flashback, and so it's essentially an emulator playing ROMs. It's the same concept, but this is licensed through Activision, and yeah, this was sold, but they still make these for modern systems. You can still get these things for the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, whatever's out there. You can still get these things, and you know, I have a few for the Wii. A lot of them on my PlayStation 2. I bought a ton of PlayStation 2 compilation discs. So many retro collections have come out on the Switch this year. Yeah, I've been seeing that too. I've been seeing a lot of great stuff. Like the one that got me excited was being able to play the Donkey Kong arcade on it. That right there almost made me run out and buy a Switch. Leland is saying the problem with emulating really old games is that they suck. Most did not age well at all. This is the reason we brought the next generation of consoles. Well, you know, that's you know, that's opinion that they suck. I mean, some people think they suck. Some people think they're great. Oftentimes, it's nostalgia. Why people are into the retro stuff. Obviously, if you try and compare Atari to PlayStation, you're going to have no contest. I mean, that's just who you are. And if you're into the wild new graphics and the I don't know, they got now like virtual reality and You're not going to get anything like that on the old systems. Or if you're into the 3D versus the 2D. For me, I've always been a 2D player, so I've always been into the 2D platforms, and once games get into 3D, I'm kind of lost. Though I would not mind a retro PS2, it actually has games better than any on PS3 or 4. Yeah, the PS2 is one of my favorite more modern systems, and to me that is modern. Um, I'm kind of like, I'm so old school. I consider N64 being modern. Yeah, there's a reason Namco is able to sell Pac-Man year after year. That game just holds up. In fact, I just picked up for the Atari 7800. I just picked up Miss Pac-Man. I haven't tried it yet, but Pac-Man will always be a good game. It doesn't matter what systems are out. Older games lack ham-fisted political pandering by default, making them superior. Yeah, that's something I've been hearing too. Is people get really kind of annoyed by a lot of modern games because you buy them and you have to keep buying them. I mean, you got to keep paying money. Or the game is free. You download it for free, but to get anywhere in it, you got to keep paying. And then they got those loot crates or whatever it's called. I don't know. I don't really have much modern stuff to actually know this offhand, but from what I've been watching and seeing, and to get anywhere in these games, you've got to pay money. Or they want you to log in. They want all your information. You got to create an account. Pac-Man on Neo Geo Pocket Color is fantastic. Pac-Man is always fantastic. Seems like an odd take. What of Missile Command? Probably the first game with political messaging. True. Yes, that was around the time when U.S. or whatever was talking about nuclear stuff. So I'm sure that game was fit right into the genre. Zen Zero. I only owned a handful of games on the Atari 2600 when I was a child, so it's been great to be able to try out all these games without the prohibited cost of buying all of them. Yeah, I mean that's another thing. One thing I always said about what was great about emulation was it gives you a chance to try the game if you want to before you actually pay for it. Now we didn't have that option obviously back in the 80s, in up into the mid 90s. If you saw a game on the shelf, you took a gamble. You might have looked it up in a magazine. There was video gaming magazines, Nintendo Power or something. You might have seen screenshots, or you could have rented it. I mean, that was your other option. You can rent. I don't think you could do that anymore. I don't know any places that rent anything, but you used to go to Blockbuster Video or somewhere, pick up a game off the shelf, look at it, pay $5 or whatever, take it home, try it out, and be like, yeah, it's good, or yeah, it sucks, I'm not going to buy it, and that's it. Most of the time, though, we would just stab in the dark. You'd be like, that looks cool. I mean, I had a few hits and misses myself. I remember, I still remember being in a store staring at Star Tropics for Nintendo. I'm like, it kind of looks cool, but I have no idea. Never heard of the game. No, nothing. Never heard of it. And I just bought it. I paid like full price. I'm like, it better be good. And I got home and I actually enjoyed it. So, I mean, I took a gamble. I was like, I'm looking for a game. I completed Zelda. I'm looking for another game that's similar, and I got lucky. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes you get home, you put it in, you're like, what the hell crap did I just buy? Extreme Rec 2000 is saying, to me, the Atari 2600 has games that hold up. You just gotta try and find them in the rough. Yeah, and that's what I mean. I try and do that on my channel. I try to dig through some of the older or more obscure stuff and see if I could find some odd games and just play them. And see, give them a shot, see what happens. BF Delano is saying, without emulation, I wouldn't have played Spiker on the Intellivision. Yeah, there you go. And here's another thing about emulation. speaking of Intellivision, is when it comes down to if I have the choice to play emulation versus the original, obviously I'm going to play the original. And main reason is I like the controls. I'm a person who likes Intellivision, so I like the Intellivision controller. But when you try and play Intellivision games with other things, like I play on my PC with this thing, so I'm playing Intellivision on a gamepad, and it's not the same to me. It's not what I'm used to, and you don't have the buttons. So games like Utopia or boxing or whatever, you got to know where the buttons are on your keyboard, and it's just different. It's a different experience. So sometimes emulation, even though it's good that you can still play these old games, it's not going to replace playing them for real. Maybe the fun factor in games peaked around PlayStation 2 era. Games like SOCOM 2 and Battlefield 2 still hold records. The key was they had addictive gameplay. Yeah, well, replayability is a big thing in games, right? You don't want to play a game. I mean, I've played a few games where I've completed it and then I put it down and I probably never picked it up again. And so there's no replayability. Um, Especially with modern games, there's a big storyline, and I've heard a lot of modern games are fairly easy. It's just you just got to get to the end of it. It might take you a day or two or a couple weeks or whatever, and then you get to the end of this whole thing. You're like done. You put the disc away and you never touch it again. Thankfully, I have USB adapters for NES and SNES controllers. Yeah, I have. I just bought one of those these things. It's a USB Nintendo style thing made by RetroLink. It's not bad. It's a little bit light. It doesn't give you the same consistent feel as It's cheaper. Obviously, it's not Nintendo quality, and I find that the buttons have a slight delay sometimes. But that could also be the ROM. Whenever I play Nintendo games, like I could never probably beat Punch Out with that thing because the delay would just be like, it would kill me. That's why I use the LTO flash on my Intellivision. Yeah, I'd love to get one of those one day. Mainly for the homebrews. Like I have the D2K ROM that was sent to me from the programmer, Carl Mueller Jr., and because he wanted me to do like a little video on it and kind of play it and review it and compare it to the original Intellivision Donkey Kong. And so he actually gave me a licensed copy so I can legally play it. I just don't have a cart to download it onto to play it on my physical machine. So I have to do it on the emulator. And the emulator's not that good. The one that I have anyways, the only one I can get to work on my computer, it's kind of crap. Oh, and I'm Burger Time from the Intellivisionaries. Oh, cool. Intellivisionaries. I've watched a bunch of those. Yeah, that's true. I do love the original Intellivision controller. Can't wait for the Amico. Yeah, yeah. That's another thing we're all going to be following the Intellivision fans, anyways. Can't wait to see what Tommy's got to get for us next. Addictive gameplay. I'm super embarrassed of how much Fortnite I've played this year. I actually have no idea about anything in Fortnite other than I've seen a few screenshots of it, and I watched one video when it first started, when it first kind of hit the scene. I watched one YouTuber play it for a bit, and I was like, "What is this?" And then it exploded. And now everything's Fortnite, Fortnite, Fortnite. Well, I guess the new thing now, I guess, is Red Dead Redemption or something. A retro console like CollectorVision that just came out for the ColecoVision is what we need for the other console. Yeah, I was actually talking about that earlier. I don't know when the release date for that is. Like, I don't think it's out yet, but it's definitely something interesting, and I might consider buying one. I do have an original ColecoVision, and it's acting up on me. The Player One control port Whenever I plug a joystick in, it doesn't register the fire button. So, and I've tried multiple joysticks, and I know it's not the joystick. So, something went loose when I was pulling out a plug or something. Fortnite is Schwarbage. Fortnite is like SOCOM and Minecraft. Yeah, well, it's your typical, I guess, 3D game. Sort of, isn't it kind of like Breath of the Wild too? Sort of idea where you're running around trying to achieve objectives or something like that. But this is where I was kind of going into, the future of retro gaming too, because I've talked about this before, and I'm like, if we look at today, retro gaming of today, it's all about collecting the old cartridges, and this is why there's a market for it. This is why people are paying big money to buy certain games, and they're getting harder to find. You go on eBay and stuff. So people are collecting the old cartridges and the old systems so they could play retro games of yesteryear. But what's the future going to be like? I mean, all these games today, for instance, in 20 years, what are people going to be doing with the games that they grew up with? If they grew up with the Xbox, the PlayStation 5, 4, or 5, or whatever comes out next, the gamers of today, what's their retro gaming going to be like? Are they going to be only ROMs? Can they have ROMs from these modern systems of today? Like, it's kind of an interesting idea, is that we're leaning into the ROM world because it's easier, it's cheaper. If a company like Nintendo were to try and release the Nintendo again, with actual releasing the games, kind of like what Atari did in '89, I think it was, where they released the Atari Junior, and then all of a sudden there was brand new Atari games on the shelf. Sega Genesis games are better than Fortnite. Just wait until gaming is streaming only and nobody can collect them. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a physical aspect to collecting retro games. Again, that's another downside to emulation. People talk about disk rot, and yet the cartridges from all those years still work. Yeah, I still got lots of Atari cartridges from 40 years ago that work. Hey, Retro Now, what's going on, buddy? Emulation is good and bad. Please elaborate. It's good for what? Your pocket, right? It's an interesting question. Modern games depend on patches and online services to function. Exactly what I was trying to say, Greg, is that these games of today, I mean, I even some old PC games that I like to play back in the 90s, to try and get them to work now, because they required updates on some of them, and to get them to work on a modern computer is challenge enough. But now I'm thinking like of today, where you buy an Xbox, what's the first thing you have to do? You have to plug it in, it has to update. Then you buy a game, and half the game doesn't even work. In fact, I remember even watching videos from RGT85, where he bought like Switch games and stuff like that, and he's like, the game's not even finished, essentially. They're just selling the game incomplete. And you have to literally download a patch to make it work, to make it playable. So in 20 years, what's going to happen with that disc? Are you going to be able to get that patch somewhere? Are you going to be able to download that still? Is the network that you had to connect to going to be even alive? Or is people just going to have to stitch them together and create emulation devices that will play them? Of course, there's also the possibility that nobody will care about these games of today in the future, and it won't matter. They'll still want to play, or maybe Atari or something. They're going to want to play that. Stu's reviews saying that everything is cyclical. Atari 2600 games are very cheap now in general, partially because the market was flooded with them, but mostly because people born after 1980s don't give a crap about them. That's true. I remember scooping them up in Goodwills and you know, all the thrift shops for like 99 cents, 50 cents. Nobody cared. I mean, Atari was whatever. Now if I see an Atari game in the store, they're actually asking for more money, a lot more money. 5 years, I think NES games will be considerably cheaper than they are now. Probably. I guess it's going to depend on the way the retro market goes. It's a lot of YouTubers like to make these things popular, and people see it like you know, angry video game nerd, for instance. They'll see him playing these old games, and then they might want them. So, you know, value could be steadily going up and down. I don't know if it's going to drop though. Maybe people will want more of the SNES stuff and the N64 stuff instead. I don't know. Bitrot can affect cartridges too. It does happen. Yes, there is cartridges that don't work. I got a Atari 2600. What is it? Moon Patrol, and it doesn't work. I actually have a bunch of them, but one of them I know, if you put it in and you get nothing, you get a blank screen. Retro Now is like, hey buddy, you know I need to collect physical things, but in ways of games that never had a home physical copy, Arcade Perfect, and it's cool to be able to play them in that way. Yeah. I mean, I see people, they have a lot of these classic games on their Wii or on their Xbox or something like that, or their Ouya. It's like when I got my Virtual Boy, $20 for the system and $5 per game. Got 11 games that day. Yeah, I don't think you could do that anymore. I will rebel the digital downloads as long as I can. That's the other thing too. When you download games onto a system, and then what happens when your system dies? I guess if you can back it into an SD card or something. Like I downloaded a couple of games on my Wii from the Wii store. But if my Wii dies on me, I don't know what I like. I guess I lose those games. Sort of like cell phones. I don't know. I'm on my third or fourth cell phone now, and I've downloaded a few games onto the older ones, and now I can't play them. And I paid money for those games, and I tried to get them onto my newer phone, and I can't. So there's no physical copies, right? Yeah, Greg's saying, true enough, Retro Now, one of the great joys of Retro Pie has been exploring these nearly forgotten arcade titles like Targ and Solar Fox. Well, that's the other thing too, keeping the games relevant, keeping the games, even though they're old and some people will say they're crap. I mean, some games are fun and addictive, even though they're simple. I always look at games like Keystone Capers on the Atari 2600, Pitfall. I mean, those games you can play all day long. They're fun. And if you get a kid of today to play them, they might actually get into it. Soon, Wayne's World on NES would have a full copy cost $6,000. Actually, well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing with, I've seen a bunch of those Nintendo games that were kind of late to the party, the games that came out just around the time when Nintendo was going off the shelves and they stopped making games like, the Flintstones 2 and Chippendales 2, Rescue Rangers 2. I mean, there's a bunch of them that came out late in the game, and now they're worth like hundreds. Some might be thousands. I don't know. Fast forward 50 years from now, everyone will have empty houses and everything will be virtual or digital. I'm glad I was an 80s kid. Such a good time to be alive. Yeah, I mean, and Retro Now is talking about, the physical world. And, we as collectors, so I'm not a big collector, but I still liked, collecting my old toys that I played with. Recently I just picked this little guy up. at Walmart, which is so cool that I got to experience again the thrill of buying an original Transformer off the shelf without having to like buy someone's like, 40-year-old or 30-year-old original one that it would be really expensive, right? So seeing this stuff come back, because I really love the old Transformer toys that I used to have, and there's like some that I always wanted that I never had, like this guy. And so to be able to buy that physical copy and be able to take it home and have it. And games are the same way. I mean, I love physical games. I love having my Atari games. No physical copies for your phone unless it's an N gauge. All right, Retro Now, you got to bounce. Happy New Year, everyone. Be safe. See you in the New Year, Retro. Thanks for popping into the chat. Rocky and Bullwinkle would have a full copy cost of $9,000 as well. Surprisingly, the original NES complete in box goes pretty cheap. Yeah, some of the consoles you can still buy fairly reasonable. If you get it in a box and everything like that, you can still get them. It's the games that are the hard part. Unless you want to get the cheaper $10 games, you can get all the sports titles or whatever. You can get some of the game show games and some of the more common games that there was so many out there. I'd love to start collecting the old Battle Beast figures. Yeah, I remember those. I think I was going to do a video on those guys. One of my toys I remember. Those two games suck so bad they shouldn't exist anymore. Haha, now I'm really bouncing. This time for real. Nostalgic for the 70s and 80s. Multi-carts are great. Yes, actually, my buddy Jim from Jim's Retro Zone, he just picked up a multi-cart Nintendo cartridge. It's got like 150 ROMs, I guess, on it. And that's another thing. I mean, you can buy those, and whether they're ROMs, are they legal? Are those carts legal? Are they sold? They're obviously not sold by Nintendo. I think it's just somebody dumped a ton of ROMs and created a label, so you can buy them. And you got now one cartridge that can play 150 different Nintendo games, and some of them are not labeled properly, or the Famicom, the Japanese Nintendo stuff. I don't just recommend those games at those very expensive prices. I don't recommend them at all. Buying pirate carts is dishonorable. At least with a flash card, it's up to you what you put on it. Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between the flash card and the those other cards that come preloaded with games, for sure. The flash card just comes as is, and then you just put whatever you want on there. Multi-part cards can be random. You never know what you're going to find on them. Yeah, that's true. Now, there was some that were legitimately sold. Like even Atari had 10 games on one carts that came out. And I'm pretty sure those were legit. Like those were actually sold that way. Like my Atari Max cards. Yeah, I think that's what you're talking about. But you can also buy the flash cards for the Atari. You can buy flash cards, I think, for every system now. I definitely wouldn't mind picking up the Intellivision one. I know it's a little bit pricey for the flash card for the Intellivision. It's about $100. So I don't know. I just couldn't justify it at the time. I was like, especially when for pretty much all the Intellivision games I want to play, I have them. I have the real game. I think that's what made it hard for me. If I didn't have all the games, and I still had my Intellivision, maybe only like 1 or 2 games, I'd probably pick it up for sure. But playing it that way would be so much better for me. Sometimes you'd find Donkey Kong, except you'd play as a pineapple saving a parrot from a car. Yeah, Well, it depends on the ROMs that they put on there. Some of them are they could be pirated ROMs, they could be hacked ROMs. Um, Even in other parts of the world, that they back in the good old days of Atari, in Brazil and all those some other countries, they sold uh, kind of knockoff Atari games that were like the original, and in some cases they might be the original game, just relabeled with a different picture on it, and they sold them that way in these countries that didn't have the original Atari stuff being sold. And they were like knockoff parts like that. Same idea. Um, I even did a video on that Tomboy. It's pretty much Pitfall, but it's not the same game. It's not Pitfall. Even the Atari Creep did a video on Tomboy as well. It's kind of a joke. Like you're playing it, and it's like the sounds are all weird, and the crocodiles are missing, things like that. It's not the same experience. And I don't think it's a hack. I think it's actually it was just a knockoff game that was sold and modified. It's the FPGA hardware implementation of a C64 and 154 floppy drives. Now that's an interesting thing too. Is I remember when I was a kid playing on my Commodore 64, the majority of the games you had were pirated, and that was normal. I mean, everybody did it. You had a friend or you knew somebody. Heck, even my mom knew people at her work that had a Commodore 64, and I would write out all my games that I had on a piece of paper, give that to the person. They would check off the games they wanted. They would do the same to you. You get a piece of paper, all the games they own, and you check off the ones you want, and then you use a copier program, and you just sit there copying games to the discs, and then swap and be like, here's some discs, here's some games. And that was normal. I mean, nobody would have thought, like, I'm sure some people realized that this wasn't right, but it was such a mainstream thing to do. Everybody that has a Commodore 64, not just a Commodore, but ZX Spectrum, any disk-based system would have done that, and they would have had multiple games on these floppy disks. That's all written in, tells you what the games are, and that's it. And even a lot of the games I have with my that I've kept, and I remember because when I got rid of my Commodore 64, the only games I got rid of were the ones that I actually bought. The store that bought it off me, bought the Commodore off me, all my games, only took the ones that were sold, like the actual real games that I bought, not the ones that were pirated, obviously. So I still kept those discs for many, many years until I got another Commodore 64. And now I'm able to actually play them again. Like a demo showcasing cool stuff on the NES can make it with its chips. My Ultimate 64 is an awesome option. It's an FPGA hardware implementation of a C64 and floppy. I buy ROM versions of the new homebrews. Hey, it's Mega Dan. What's up, buddy? Not for me, but not bad. Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, it's really a matter of how you look at it. Because you can look at it through the emulation devices. You can look at it through the downloading and uploading issue. I mean, it's a huge topic. I mean, emulation, because there's legit ways of doing it. Hey, RC in the NYC, what's going on, man? Or maybe a port of Atari Jaguar game. So that's the other thing. Like, not everything has emulation in ROMs. At least I don't think. I mean, some of them do, but they're trickier to get to work, and I would say, like, I've tried to get, say, the Atari 7800 emulator to work properly. The one that I finally found that works, it has ROMs with it, but you can't add more. Well, you can, but it doesn't seem to work for me. I've tried. So, or even just to try and get an Atari 5200 or the Atari 8-bit system, because even with the Atari 8-bit, I'm finding it really hard to get games on that. I got a small selection of them, and I've pretty much done videos on almost all of them. But you know, and I even talked to the immortal John Hancock about it, about where can I get um, games for my Atari 8-bit, and his suggestion was get a flash card. He's like, flash card, problem solved. I'm like, oh, okay, well that kind of makes sense. But again, you know, the flash cards they're not cheap. They're about $100. J Love needs to be here. Yeah, I'm sure she would have some good opinions on this. Yeah, nostalgia for the 70s, 80s is also saying that the systems are getting older and older. Eventually, they will fail. And it's not just that, too. It's the other hardware required to run these systems. You want to play a Nintendo, I'm going to suggest that you plug it into a CRT TV. You can plug them into the modern TVs, but even now it's like it's getting harder and harder with modern TVs. The way they're constructing them, they might not have the ports in them. You have to come up with some kind of way of rigging it up to get it in there. The display is all going to be wrong. Nintendo was back in the day when we had the smaller, you know, boxier TVs. So when you plug a Nintendo into a modern, big, wide screen mother of a TV, you get the stretching, and or you're going to have the bars. And so it's not only just the systems are dying, but you're also dealing with trying to hook up these old systems to modern technology. I have two CRT TVs in my basement, and who knows how long they're even going to last, right? Like eventually those start to fail, the tubes on them blow, or whatever, you know, whatever they're made out of starts to go. And like I have a Commodore 64 monitor, and the last time I plugged it in, the whole screen was kind of like faded and green. So I'm like, this is pretty much done. It's like ready for the lawn. Like I don't use it anymore. I haven't used it in years. But you know the TVs, and the other thing is with the Nintendo, for instance, to use the gun, the light gun, you need the CRT TVs. I'm pretty sure they don't work on the flat screens, from what I've been told, anyways. Now I know with the emulation boxes, like the Atari flashbacks and the Retron 77, some of them actually have like settings in there, so you can change the screen and stuff, and kind of do some manipulation to make it look more like authentic, or actually work on your screen, your TV. Some of them that actually plug into the HDMI cable outlets. Um, you know, so they kind of do it through these devices that you can play your games and make them look more authentic, or whatever. Just make it look right on a flat screen. Because I've heard a lot of people say things like, you know, they look like crap. Like I even plug in my Super Nintendo to my flat screen downstairs, just to play some games, and I'm noticing it looks weird. Like the pixels just don't look right. Something that looks off. There are some light guns that will work on LCDs. Huh. We can say it's both hard to emulate and develop games for it. Oh, okay, so Extreme Rec 2000 is saying, heck, I can say the Jaguar is #1 of the hardest systems to emulate right now. That's interesting. The Atari Jaguar. There have been quite a few systems that kind of came out that were, I don't know, not as popular, and kind of got left behind. So it'd be nice to see some of these games. Like I'm sure when the Jaguar came out, people were more looking at like other systems of the day, GameCube or whatever. Nostalgic saying, I still do all my Atari 5200 reviews on an Atari 5200. You can't emulate those controllers yet, but maybe soon. Yeah, I've tried to look into like emulating 5200, and it pretty much just points you towards the 8-bit emulators, and I tried to get one to work, and I couldn't figure out how to get it to work. I couldn't figure out how to get the games to play, and I was just like, got fed up. I'm like, forget it. If it's not going to be easy for me, forget it. I do remember, though, back in the day, my favorite system to emulate was the Game Boy. I think at the time it was called Virtual Boy. And because I had a Game Boy, like I have a bunch of Game Boys, but it was just cool being able to play it on a computer screen and have the big screen. Like, sure, the Super Game Boy came out, and that was cool too. But I remember emulating in it, and the first games that I started playing were the Pokemon games, because I didn't have them, I never tried them, and I didn't know what they were about. So I thought, hey, why don't I just try it on an emulator? And Robbie is saying it's not black and white. Emulation will ultimately preserve video game history. However, when it detracts from the sales of existing companies, some systems like the Vectrex are in the public domain. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if the games are really old and they're just there to preserve them, and so people can still play them and have fun with them, that's different than if you're emulating Nintendo Switch and putting it on a system of today and selling it. That is really bad because that's taking money out of Nintendo's pocket. Nintendo's not going to like that, and they're going to, sue you. Visual Boy Advance. Yeah, that was it. That was the one that I ended up getting another emulator to play some of the older Game Boy games because, there's a lot of Game Boy games. There's tons of Game Boy games out there. And I only had a small collection of Game Boy games. I had one of those little carrying cases and I put the little cartridges in there. But there's so many Game Boy games that I just and every Game Boy Advance and then Color and then tons of them. And a lot of them are expensive now too. If you want to buy the real one, they don't suck. They're very good for certain games once you referred them. The gold kits were fine. Hey, Games are. What's going on, man? Maybe you want to chime in on this subject. I know it's a hot topic for some people, and it's some people love emulation, some people hate it, some people have problems with it, some people don't have problems with it. The funny thing is, the source code for the Jaguar was made public years ago. I'm okay with emulation for anything that's not commercially available. Yes, now that's the thing. I mean, it's like I kind of said this earlier. Like some games they release them, you could buy the physical copies, then they disappear off the shelves. The company will never put that game out again because it costs too much. They might make the ROMs available, kind of like Nintendo making the ROMs available for download. You have to pay for them, but you download them on your Wii or whatever. But Atari and all them, you can't without buying the old ones. You got to source them out and buy them used And of course, emulation also is beneficial for the homebrewers. And depending on that too, that could also be a messy situation because some homebrews they want to sell them to make profit because it costs them money to build the program, and if they want to sell them and they want to create a box for it and everything, the artwork and the manuals, they want to sell these games. So even the homebrews can be an issue. Some of the Atari 2600 games are no longer commercially available due to companies going bankrupt. Yes, and we have like the 83 crash to blame for that. A lot of companies made games and then disappeared. The company disappeared. So whether the rights to that game just went into the public domain or whether somebody else bought them out. Like for instance, the Intellivision, the Amico, Tommy's said that they got some kind of deal to put Magic games on there. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if Intellivision bought the rights to the Magic if they bought the company or if the games were just whatever, public domain games, or I don't know. I don't know what happened there, but yeah, that company, Magic, stopped making games. So without emulation, there would be no homebrews. Homebrews rely on emulation to test their projects. Yes, for sure. When they're creating their game, they play them on an emulator, and then eventually they will, because nobody makes the games the way they used to. Even like Atari, people make Atari games using like new software, modern software, and then they test it on emulating devices and stuff. In the past, it was totally different. Like the programmers had to do it in like the complicated coding and all that stuff. And of course, we have to like figure out what games are legal to own and which games are public. And then there was the whole thing with Princess Rescue, which I don't know what happened there. Maybe someone in the chat knows. But that game was sold, I believe it was sold through Atari Age in the beginning too. And it's pretty much a Super Mario Brothers game on the Atari. And they just called it Princess Rescue instead. And they were selling them. And now all of a sudden you can't buy them. Like they're gone. So you can download the ROM, but you can't buy the cartridge unless you buy it used. I don't know if it was if Nintendo stepped in and put a cease and desist order on them or something, or what. I don't know what happened with that, but I have seen people selling them. They want like well over $100 for it if you want to buy a used copy of it. Still is the standard for getting your Atari homebrew ready. Yeah. There's like Batari Basic or something like that you run, and then you can emulate it on Stella. Yeah, like D2K for Intellivision, exactly. Yes, Nostalgic owns a homebrew Princess Rescue. Yeah, I remember talking to you about that before. Nintendo did step in. Electronite sold it, but they stopped and said they won't sell it ever again. Princess Rescue is just a very limited release. The guy doesn't want to make more. I want one too. Yeah. I remember when I first heard of it, I got wind of it. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? There's a Super Mario Brothers game on the Atari. And I looked it up and I was like, that looks cool. And then I tried to source them out. I'm like, I ain't paying that kind of money for it. It's just too much money. But I did find the ROM and I thought, I'll give the ROM a shot. I'll play it a bit. I tried to put it on my Atari Flashback portable. And it works, but it's limited to what it can do. You can't, I think you can't run or you can't shoot or something. He doesn't want to sell anymore due to fear. Now, are you talking about Princess Rescue or are you talking about D2K? I know somebody was talking about D2K. Games are talking about that, so I believe you can still buy D2K. It's just Princess Rescue, yeah, you can't buy it, and that's probably true. You fear Nintendo suing them. Is the ROM available? If you can get the ROM, you can play it on a Harmony. Yeah, it is. I think, where did I get it? I don't know if it was the Atari Age or if it was another Atari website that offers ROMs. I think it was like an Atari homebrew. So I know I got the Sonic the Hedgehog game, which is called Zippy the Porcupine. I got that ROM off of the Atari forums or something. D2K is no longer available. Oh, that sucks. But Donkey Kong Arcade, or DK Arcade, though, wasn't that also for sale, or did they pull it now? I remember it wasn't long ago I saw a post for DK Arcade or whatever. You could run, jump, and shoot. I played Zippy at a convention. Pretty neat. Yeah, well, it's kind of fun being able to play these modern style games on a system like that. I mean, even just like around the end of Atari's life cycle, um, they were porting a lot of kind of more modern games, and they, Double Dragon and Kung Fu Master, or what else came out? Akari Warriors. They were putting those out at the same time that they were available on Nintendo, and you could actually buy like Double Dragon and stuff like that on the Atari 2600. But the game obviously wasn't as good, or it's not as good until the Atari 7800 came out, anyways. Best to play Princess Rescue with the Genesis controller. That makes sense. You got the extra button, right? Now, from what I understand, like the Atari had a capability of like several buttons, but the joystick only came with one. Uh, because you had like other joysticks, like the number pads and all that. So that's how That's how they were able to make Princess Rescue, or even some homebrew games with the multiple buttons that you could not do on a real like Atari. Nintendo isn't making money off of it anymore. I don't see the harm, even if it hurts my sales. If people choose to emulate it, I just like seeing old games live on. That's the thing. I know, and I remember that conversation before about emulation and downloading ROMs and all that. Even back when it wasn't like a couple months ago when those ROM sites were under attack and they were pulling down the ROM sites, and people are like, what's the issue? Why does Nintendo care? These games are old. They don't sell them anymore. They're not making money off them anymore. Like they are, but they aren't. Like they can offer them for sale for really cheap, but the real money is in their modern stuff, like their Breath of the Wild and stuff like that, like the Switch. That's where they're making their money now. So why would they care about their old 1985 games? So I think a lot of people were kind of throwing that out there and kind of questioning it. Also, games like Super Mario Brothers. I mean, they've made so many damn copies of the cartridge. You can pretty much get them everywhere for cheap. They care because of NES and SNES classics, I think. Yeah, but the value of the classic systems is you can easily plug them into a TV. You don't have to have all the knowledge of what an emulator is and what a ROM is and where to get them, and you have to go to these websites to download them. All that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about it. So for the average Joe who just wants to relive the old memories of playing on their Intellivision or their Nintendo or their Coleco, buying these emulation devices takes care of that, because they just buy it, they plug it into their TV, and they start playing. And this is where people are like, oh, why would I buy that when I can just get a RetroPie? Well, not everybody's going to know how to do that. Not everybody's going to know how to get a RetroPie, how to put it together, how to put the ROMs on it. Maybe you could buy one from somebody who already put it together, but people aren't going to understand that. Like, that's sure there's going to be some that will, but I'd say like a big majority of the people who think the NES Classic is valuable, it's not necessarily someone that's going to know all about emulation and what's going on underneath the hood. They just see this cute little box that looks like their old Nintendo they had when they were a kid. They plug it into their TV, and I'm playing Super Mario Brothers again. So it's different. And they're trying to do that with the PS1 or the PlayStation Classic, but I think that just it failed. For whatever reason, it failed. People didn't like the game choices and all that. And my thing is PlayStation is not retro enough. I think it's not missed yet. PlayStation 1, people are buying PlayStation 4. They've moved on. They're playing. You could just get a PS2, which has the backwards compatibility, and still play the original games on it. I don't think a lot of people really miss the PlayStation as much as they miss the Nintendo. And then, of course, the game choices that they decided to throw on there. Well, this has been an interesting chat anyways. I'd love to keep it going in the comment section, though, if you've watched this or if you just caught on now or whatever. And keep this going in the discussion, keep the chat going, because I think this is cool. And maybe I'll do another one on the same topic or something similar. But yeah, I had a lot of fun doing this, and a lot of cool people came on, so I want to thank everybody for coming in. Like I said, I normally would do a video game play or whatever. And this is kind of what sparked this too. I mean, my last video I did, I was playing some ROMs, and people are like, "Hey, you're playing illegal ROMs, or this is illegal, or whatever." And I was like, "Well, all of a sudden this is becoming a topic. People are starting to point that out, whereas before it just didn't seem like anybody cared." So that's kind of why I started this one. I was like, it's interesting that people are now going on about it. And of course, the whole Soulja Boy thing and all the other stuff, the PlayStation Classic, and there's just been a lot of ROM talk lately, and that's why I thought, is it good or bad? I just wanted to throw the conversation out there. Um, Throw your 2 cents into the comments box after the video is done uploading to YouTube. It'll be available if you missed any of it. If you came in late, you can always check back. And thanks everybody for coming in. It's been fun. And if you have any other ideas or topics that you would like to discuss, throw them at me. You can find me on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, all over the place. Leave a comment below, whatever, if you think there's an interesting chat you'd like to have on my show. Anyways, thanks everybody for coming in. It's been fun.